Gather light, scatter darkness. We do not understand except by observing fantasies. Giordano Bruno. The master, speaking with the grand music master of Luz, said, "Music can be understood in this way. The players first in unison, then freely harmonizing, playing separately or carrying on from one another, and thus the piece is completed." The Analects of Confucius. Now, the spawn of the earth, another example of a human life. We live out our fantasies and imaginations through honest and resonant intellectualizations. Then comes the deep feeling, the transparency of the perceived world, which resembles a naivety. Here, we reclaim something like a consolidated inner truth. Defiantly, we oppose oblivion and forgetfulness. According to the law of self-reflection, we look up between the hypostatic mirrors. We reflect on this world and on ourselves, ascending through proportion, observation, and cognition. We find signs, tokens, and notions of the divine, and thus erect, furnish, and construct an inner temple. Ultimately, we want to leave the spectacle of illusions, the great hall of mirrors. We expand vertically and horizontally, stripping away the veils until the essence returns to infinity. Resurgent atavisms are signs of true archetypes. In the language of symbols, what is not superficial is always essential. All deeply living ideas are older than human existence. They leave us cosmic forces that exist a priori. They are only temporarily drawn into the intellect and the soul. They are touched by our measure. With the means of a child of nature and the starry sky woven into the fabric of the human idea, discovered and focused. Ideas are the substance of the forces that bind our common destiny. They are revealed through brooding, pondering, acting out, feeling and experiencing. Sometimes this happens to a greater extent than fate may forgive. The destinies that do not allow such transgressions force them upon us so that we learn from them. Where does the child of nature meet the roots in the stars? When do the lovers become one, united in harmony, united in liberation? There are three kinds of heroism, I believe: that of conquering the world in an overarching triumph, that of conquering the interior in an overwhelming gigantomachy, the creation of cultural and civilizational foundations that make societies flourish. What distinguishes a hero from a wretch is the impact he or she creates in the world in the longer run. A malevolent intention that leads to good is a Mephistophelian prerogative. A benevolent intention that brings about good is holy. An evil will that brings injustice to the foe is that of a conscious destroyer. A good will that brings about evil levels hells. In order to grasp the power of the images, the interpreter must in some way participate in the beliefs of those who are frightened and fascinated by them. Having this in mind, how will the understanding of the world evolve in a binary star system with 3 moons orbiting an inhabited planet? Will the beings inhabiting this world grasp different configurations of forces? Their astronomy and therefore their astrology will be different. Their technology and evolution might be different. Perhaps the nature of life that evolved in such an environment would exhibit a different kind of contact beings and forms. Apophatic between itself and the deep world, it is aware of the autochthonous forces of all its being and the deep grammar of the cosmos in many ways. Obviously, through itself in contact with the world through knowledge and interfaces of interaction. Perhaps as lost as we are in our being, perhaps as natural as their innate inclination, perhaps as lost. If a human were to travel to such a system torn away from this world, how would he react to the nature of such a strange, remote solar system? If he were affected by the 3 moons, 2 stars, and all the planets, how would he react? How would he respond? We are all immersed in an eerie world. It is more or less interconnected and understood by scientific and astronomical axioms. And yet, by and large, it is unfathomable. Multiple hidden physical, transcendent, and occult parallel factors and variables have their influence. Just as I believe planets have their natures, so do stars have their natures as ensouled entities, hidden worlds full of strange life. It is remarkable that we too often limit the concept of life to something organic, living in the mere biological sense. a visible note telling the invisible force, the idea, the omnipresent being, the panentheistic intelligence. Between these forms of life, there are worlds that we can rarely describe without divisions and ideas. We often refer them to ancient fantasies and bestiaries. We may think them all fantasies and mythomania of an overstimulated or psychotic mind. Or we may flirt with the idea that these worlds were once closer, more obvious, visible to the human participant, without relegating them to unconscious anthropological structural symbolism, but in interaction with each other. Not holistically objective, but also not totally dependent on the mind of the individual. We forget we are dreaming and think the spectacle is reality, or we observe events in the dream as if they were real. Lucid dreaming while awake is a sincere attitude. In dreams, we revirtualize sleep while with waking, yet we act through the same tissue, both in lucid dreaming while awake and in lucid or incestuous dreaming while asleep. Memory and history are not the same thing. That what is now was not always so is the repeated phrase of wirelists and presentists. It has always been so, they say. Nothing new under the sun, and yet it is ever-changing. Like the flow of time and events you enter, any world-eating race to a metaphysical level by an act of hypostasis becomes a wonder, a horror and an awe of unimaginable proportions. It depends on the perspective of the observer and his ability to go beyond what is comfortably known. Everything that is reified and yet belongs to the sphere of the sanctuary becomes a living sign. Like the temple of the spheres in Haran, like the ziggurat in ancient Borsippa, later called the Tower of Babel, or the city of Ecbatana, built by King Dioses of Media. Its mighty walls were modeled after the planetary spheres of the heavens, of the solar system. When the reification of the divine becomes too materialistic, too nearly realistic, it distends and forgets itself. This causes the human spirit to reproduce itself with itself. It happens in the conceptual swamp through the separation of analogy, the confusion of referential proportions. It passes into a horizontal reflection that no longer even separates itself from transcendent factors, but more and more from its own content. This situation leads to an infinite variety which is superficial. Because of the flatness of the horizontal spread, it is the spawn of the postmodern fantasy, in which the infantile fantasies itself are cherished, reified, and real. The magical transcendent hybrid, which is a perpetual motion machine, becomes the hubris of man-made hybrids. They need to be constantly animated and cease to function without the animators. This is the main difference between the objective world and its envelopes and virtualities. It cuts off human participation in the flow of the living world and the world soul. It becomes detached from the source of life and builds sandcastles on the beaches of dried up lakes. Emperor Wu of Chan, living 156 before modern era to 87 before modern era, asked himself a fundamental question. What is the relationship of heaven to earth so that man is in the world of nature in relation to cosmos and heaven? He invited the best minds of his time to participate in measuring proportions, exchanging observations and sharing insights. In order to let the thoughts rise in great depth to the sky, bases were created once again, foundations. So again something was settled, not about individual and superficial things, but about deep insights gained from the world as it is. The times, the changes, the place of man and woman in the world, in the midst of nature, in a civilized refinement. So what manages the movement of the starry sky? How to interpret in a symbolic way the observation of astronomers, philosophers in Wu, Xi, and Shu, magicians or shamans, both male and female. How nature works and how natural philosophy elevates it to the numinous fires of the third transcendent. And later, how to relate all this to the world of human affairs to guide them. We can approach the omitted, unknown, inexpressible deep laws of the physical, objective universe, which are discovered to a possible extent. After that, we continue with metaphysical measurements and directed realizations. They are communicated in the human symbolic language that laid the foundation for all advanced civilizations in their beginnings. There is no question that astronomy was the most important matter for any form of philosophy to emerge. I present a henotheistic panentheistic view in which the ante-cosmic, pre-phenomenal transcendence is also the point of return. It is a non-Abrahamic view of the world. Everything is enveloped by an intelligible force. In a world of multiplicity and change, of gradations of force, the harmony of tension unfolds from the infinite point to the whole sphere of the great game. From the simplest to the most chaotic, it has laws that generate themselves from the simultaneous states. From the point to the abysses, all worlds have their own laws. Consequently, all beings that inhabit them show the tendency that corresponds to these laws. The transcendent point is that of silence and simplicity. There is inequality. Chaos is a potential of everything, the point of monadic singularity, where chaos generates laws as Proteus that wrap themselves in the stability of all possible worlds. Later, they are attracted by the pull of the void, chaos, or return to the monadic point, the serpent's egg. However, this is not a process of unification and separation, but a seamless integration. The great movement, the difference, the war, it's all in between. Observe the archetypes in the movements of the stars and planets. If we observe the archetypes of nature and human beings, we can deduce the changes on a small scale, that is, on a human scale. The interpretation of these laws, grasped according to the possibility of fragmented or unified, topographically unequal perceptions, is a matter of hypothetic efforts. The knowledge, experience, skill, socio-historical environment, history of ideas, inventions, and history of perception itself have been expressed in different ways. Different peoples in different cultures, ethnicities, tribes, and civilizations related their wholeness to the world with different standards. Some of them measured in unison, others measured different parts of the world. Comparativism in mysteries and religious traditions is as useful as it is inaccurate. It allows us to explore different perspectives and perceptions. If practiced, they can be realized tools or ineffectual, deluded attempts and ordeals. Their mystical, affective, and intellectual configuration towards the perceived world have changed over time. It depends on what people in these social formations understood and what their traditions were. Based on science and concepts that were possible to think, changes allowed by taboos. What was considered sacred and profane, clean or unclean. These clusters of shared perceptions form threads of kaleidoscopic ideas and kaleidoscopic phenotypes of being. These views flowed in the mental, emotional, and spiritual bloodstream through group and individual vistas and breakthroughs. They had their pioneers, actors, and participants. History is viewed backwards from the present and reinterpreted through cultural concatenations of scientific, social, political, and religious precepts that are currently established. This does not take into account that people in history have perceived the inner territories and the exoteric worlds differently. Some have not even made a distinction. The variations throughout the ages in terms of metaphysical patterns, forces, and worlds, visible and invisible, have been static, dynamic, chaotic, but most of the time orderly. Attempting to establish man-made laws, foundations on planet Earth, and structures that reflect them in the world of nature is an arduous task. The foundation, which were long-lasting, aspired to be approximate. And yet they were prone to decay, degeneration, and corruption if not renewed and reformed. This is the fate of all civilizations that have long been buried under the desert sands. People who drive around as sacred and profane, may we respect their past dust and breath, have long since been blown away by the winds. What blinds the mortal who now chases this and that with surrogates that smother his longings and give him temporary relief, until one is alone with being alone, alone in the world of forgetfulness, embraced in the company of those who have never forgotten us. The gods and goddesses have never been subservient to men, nor were they turned in demons as some Jews and Christians would wish so. Since all things are reflected in each other through the analogy of being, they can be influenced in passionate objectivity or impassionate abiding, in the sense that they are receiving impressions and delivering them again, but remain unmoved and lose nothing of their essence. The objective truth is most certainly beyond human comprehension. It can be too terrible to bear or too glorious to outshine and burn our eyes like the sun of Hyperion. It is a conceptual sign that is perfectly holy and noble in absolute form. It is not a retreat, but an invitation to study, to experience, to climb the ladder of these spheres through practiced epiphanies and realized practical illuminations, like within the Mitrite cave. The myth of the powers thrives in spite of the futile attempts of the exclusive religions to discard it. The forgetfulness of the human race has not harmed or damaged these powers, whether they are stellar deities, cosmic, noetic, noetic, essential, aeonic, tonic, cosmic, telluric, elemental, natural, those of life, death, or stranger worlds. Whether small, humble spirits or higher deities, whether they belong to the earth or another more profound world, whether they are favorable to our race or neutral, or quite the opposite, whether they can understand us, whether we are accepted by them as lesser gods in the process of deification, whether they love us, despise us, ignore us, or have no such instincts whatsoever. After all, they are not mortal human beings. Whether interact in a way that suits their nature, essence, and inclinations. In an active and impressionable world of diversity, this is often difficult to predict. Confucius wrote in the Analects that it is sometimes better to keep gods and spirits at a distance, primarily to respect them. As humans, we have hardly mastered ourselves, so how can we know anything about anyone else? The ancients understood that the stars, nature, and their existence were sacred phenomena, and so they understood the gods in such a way. The gods as powers came first, as it is said in the Pimander, before the solar system was even formed. The world followed, the human race being merely one of the recent brief spawnings of life on planet Earth. And what are we as a whole now, deprived of wonder, of harmony, convinced we know everything without knowing anything, but taking for everything a figment of the largely invisible? Apophatic perception or negative theology is the knowledge that we know nothing. We need to find some certainties, great certainties, some hard-won experiences, solutions, realizations, beliefs, tunnel realities, understandings that we can rely on. That is a necessity for all foundations. Without it, the continuity of our reality function falls apart into derealization. When we behave properly on the personal level, we discover beauty, harmony, great corrections that resemble the cosmos. It is not a chaos after all. Order up chaos. Quite the opposite. It is in harmony with it, and we try to approach this discovery by bringing our self-reflective animal self, because in essence we are animals, aspiring to the divine. First, get rid of the swine, into resonance with those forces, to become a human worthy of the name, and in the process of homoisis theo, theon ergon, homoisis theo as a pagan Neoplatonic concept, not a Gnostic Judeo-Christian one, theon ergon, meeting the gods halfway and letting them form and shape you, in the mutual impressions between deities and humans, to ascend as deified mortals to their proper places and palaces. Thank you.